Karen, how long does it normally take from kind of first chat through to a live date on a kind of general project, if you like, for the real-time corporate action service?
There's probably not a standard answer to that question. It would depend on the organisation that we're working with. So we're really guided by our customers' own timelines. It would depend on the organisation themselves, what type of organisation they might be, for instance, whether they're a broker or a custodian. And then their own priorities. We all have different priorities that we're working on. But we've found that typically those organisations that might have standards capability already, for instance, 15022 or 20022, are more likely to get up to speed a bit more quickly because they do have those capabilities. So the discussion usually starts with a conversation with Magda in our market information team, and then moves on to an evaluation phase that might take a couple of months typically, where they look at the specifications that we have, our user guidelines, and so on, and may decide to take test files as well so they can actually see what the output looks like. And then all things going well, then they would move into a development phase and full-on testing. And they might do that in parallel with their current service. So it depends on each organisation, but that development testing phase could take, at least 4 months or longer, again, depending on their own plans.
And through that process, what's the kind of the execution team like in terms of the resources that would normally need to be used to go from that kind of first conversation to a live project?
Typically, the team would include hopefully a project manager. That really helps us as well because we have a point person to go to coordinate the changes and answer any questions. Always business SMEs that know corporate actions and know what sort of content they're looking for and where to put it once they've received it. So we expect they would be supported by business analysts. Then you have the development team, so a more technical perspective, and that might be about the messages themselves, developing to the messages, translating whatever needs to happen. And then the connectivity side of things as well. There's also those considerations about whether they want to use our Swift service or our other FTP style service. And then testing, of course. And depending on how they use the data, if they're forwarding that data in some way to their customers, then they may want to test with their own customers as well.
Absolutely. And so part of that is, and you mentioned this kind of this validation idea, how do people get comfortable with the data that they're receiving? And as you said, especially when they're passing it on to their own clients.
That's probably one of the key topics we talked about with the industry when we were developing this service. And we took a step back, and it wasn't just about that notification service. It was how do we improve the end-to-end process from issuer to the consumer of that information. So we've developed a service where we also, through our listing rules, mandated a process for issuers to make announcements in a certain way about corporate action events. So we basically mandated that and said that issuers had to fill in online forms so we could capture the data in a certain way. We could validate what they were inputting and then ensure it was the best record possible that was being announced to market, and also for us to consume through our own database and eventually to the 20022 service. So issuer is the source of truth in that timeline. And we used an industry working group, worked with them very closely to gather the requirements from the participants in the market to inform the questions we would be asking of the issuer and the data they wanted in the 20022 service. So, we've used the industry as much as possible to get that best announcement possible. I think the other factor is that we've based it on standards, so everyone should have a relative comfort about the data that we're providing, formats and that sort of thing.
Where are the pitfalls? I mean, ultimately, no project runs 100% according to plan. Where would you say the top few kind of obstacles and challenges that a bank or a broker is likely to run into as they look at using this?
We think it's probably getting started. It's really about building that business case, understanding what the challenges are for the organisation, what they're trying to solve for, and building the business case around that and describing the benefits internally in their own organisation in a compelling way to get the resources and funding that they need. So that's probably the first thing, so that getting that initial evaluation done and then sign off on the project and getting it prioritised is probably the key hurdle, we think, for everyone. And then from a more practical perspective, working with us to understand the licence of the service. What does that mean? How can they use the data? What's the best fit for the organisation? And so on.
this has often been described as kind of a journey, in terms of a journey of convergence, in terms of actually people using the service and building out the trust and everything. What does the right kind of structure look like in terms of actually how they work with you, how to manage the change together, how to manage the feedback, and how to build the solution, as you said, collaboratively?
As I mentioned, it's really helpful if we have a project manager on their side to work with, and probably a business lead who understands the business side of what they're trying to achieve. And we'll work as much as we can with a customer to help answer questions, provide test files and so on, just to help them work through that timeline and evaluation to get to the best point. All the organisations are different in the way they're going to transform that data and then reuse it either internally or push it further to their customers. So it's just thinking about how they do that. And, there's nuances in the messages, and we can help talk through those and use our own experts internally to support that.
And so obviously this is a live kind of organic offering. Where does the solution go from here in terms of roadmaps and development over the next few years?
For the notification service itself, we've done everything we can to get it to a full coverage situation. So in June 2021, we did the final release on the service. So it now covers all corporate action events that ASX covers, which is a greater set than we have in our more proprietary format reference products. So we see this as the premium product. It should be the go-to product for those that want that full data set and also the real-time service. So we think that's great that we've gotten to that point. But of course, we'll continue to work with customers to take on board their feedback for any future change. We've also got standards changes to take into account. So we believe there will be iterative updates to the service as we go forward. If we think about the reference data offerings in a more holistic way, it's also working with each customer to understand what their information needs are and whether this is the right product or it sits alongside some of our other products, whether they be batch or real time, to get them to where they need to be for their data needs.
Just a quick question, is tax not part of the roadmap?
We do more tax information if that was a requirement from an announcement perspective. So we do cover quite a lot of tax elements, but they're not necessarily an ASX requirement for them to be announced to market. We've included questions on dividends, for instance, which are elements that the tax office, for instance, needs a company to provide, and they typically use an ASX announcement as the method to provide that publicly. So we've included those tax elements, which is quite a long list, particularly for funds and those sorts of entities, to describe those details and for the customers to get it in one place.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.